You've known for a while which direction makes sense, not as a feeling, as a fact you keep stepping around, something in you already decided, but you haven't let it be the answer yet. Tomorrow morning, that changes in a specific way. 6 weeks of configuration led here in sequence. Saturn and Neptune dissolved the edges of both options in February. Mercury retrograde ran a return loop for 3 weeks. Sun-Neptune on March 22nd lifted the fog without naming what was underneath. Mercury conjunct the North Node yesterday made one path heavier than the other. Tomorrow, March 25th at 4:54 a.m. Eastern Time, the Sun reaches exact conjunction with Saturn at 4 degrees 54 minutes Aries, the first time this conjunction has occurred in Aries in approximately 30 years. Saturn doesn't suggest, it defines. What Sun-Saturn does on March 25th is not give you a new insight. It gives the direction that already became dominant a structure it can't retract from. One path gets weight, the other gets a name, and that name makes continuing to treat it as a real option harder to sustain. The unexpected thing about this transit isn't the pressure. It's what gets exposed, that one of the two versions of your life was never actually available to you the way you thought. In the next few minutes, you'll discover 3 things. First, why Sun conjunct Saturn in Aries operates differently from any Saturn contact in the past 30 years, and what that means for a decision that's been forming since February. Second, why the sequence from March 22nd through today made the two paths asymmetric, and what Sun-Saturn does to that asymmetry on March 25th. Third, what becomes visible about the direction that was never really a choice, and why that recognition lands differently than making a decision. 6 weeks of equal-seeming options had a structure. That structure reaches its definition point at 4:54 a.m. Eastern Time tomorrow. What felt like 2 open paths does not stay equally open past this conjunction. Notice what that state actually feels like. Not the content of the 2 options, the posture you've been holding. You approach one direction, something in you recognizes it. Not excitement, recognition, the quieter thing. And then, almost immediately, you pull back toward the middle. Not because the recognition was wrong, because letting it be the answer requires letting the other option stop being an option. And that second part hasn't happened yet. That's the specific state this week has been building toward closing. Not the confusion, the holding of 2 things equally when one of them is already known. That takes effort. Sustained, quiet effort. The kind that shows up as a low-grade weight you carry through the day without naming it. 6 weeks of that weight has a start date, February 20th, when Saturn and Neptune met at 0 degrees Aries and removed the structural clarity that would have let one path settle over the other. From that point, both options had the same amount of fog around them. Both remained equally possible, not because they were equally real, but because the conditions that would have made one of them clearly heavier weren't there yet. Those conditions arrive tomorrow at 4:54 a.m. Eastern Time, less than 12 hours from now. You're watching this in the window between the last step of the sequence and the final one. The asymmetry is already present. It formed yesterday when Mercury crossed the North Node and one path became heavier than the other for the first time. But asymmetry isn't definition. One path feeling heavier is not the same as the other path receiving a name. Tomorrow morning, it gets a name. To understand why that happens at 4:54 a.m. Eastern Time specifically, and why this particular Sun-Saturn contact does something that the same conjunction in previous years could not, you need to see the full sequence that led here and what each step was actually doing. 5 steps. Each one did exactly one thing and stopped. Together, they form a sequence that only makes sense in the order it ran, because each step created the conditions the next one required. Step 1. February 20th. Saturn and Neptune met at exact conjunction at 0 degrees Aries. Saturn is structure, the thing that holds a decision in place long enough to act on it. Neptune dissolves edges. When those 2 planets met exactly at 0 degrees, Aries, the first degree of the zodiac, the point where new cycles begin, where a new direction needs ground most, the result was specific. Not general confusion, the removal of structural clarity at the precise point where the 2 paths diverged. Both options became equally edgeless. Neither one had more definition than the other. The fog wasn't over everything, it was targeted, placed exactly where the distinction between the two paths would have been visible. That was the condition everything else ran on top of. Step 2. February 26th through March 20th. Mercury retrograde in Pisces. Mercury governs how thinking becomes deciding, the moment where consideration turns into position, where you land on something rather than continuing to turn it over. Retrograde in Pisces, Mercury ran a return loop. Every approach to the edge of a decision ended in reset. Not because you changed your mind, because Pisces retrograde removes the line between "I've already concluded" and "I still don't know." You could reach the threshold and not be able to feel it as a threshold. The South Node, the pull toward the familiar, the already known, had enough structural weight to keep matching the North Node's pull forward every time. 3 weeks of that loop on top of the fog from Step 1. Step 3, March 22nd. Sun conjunct Neptune at 1 degree 52 minutes Aries. This is where the fog lifted, but only the fog. Sun-Neptune in the first degree of Aries didn't name anything. It stopped the dissolution. The edges of both options became visible for the first time since February. But visible edges are not the same as weight. Both paths could now be seen clearly. Neither one was yet heavier than the other. Step 3 ended the concealment. It didn't end the equality. Step 4, March 23rd. Mercury conjunct the North Node at 8 degrees 50 minutes Pisces, the third and final pass of a cycle that began February 12th. The North Node marks forward direction. When Mercury completed its full retrograde arc and returned to the North Node in direct motion, the cycle that had sustained the return loop closed. The South Node lost its structural counterweight, and for the first time in 6 weeks, one path became heavier than the other, not because a decision was made, but because the mechanism that kept both options leveled stopped running. Yesterday, asymmetry arrived. The scale tilted. Step 5. Tomorrow, March 25th, 4:54 a.m. Eastern Time. Sun conjunct Saturn at 4 degrees 54 minutes Aries. This is where asymmetry becomes definition, not clarification, not further tilting, definition. The kind that gives one side of the scale a name and removes the structural possibility of continuing to treat the other side as equally real. 4 of these 5 steps have already happened. You are between Step 4 and Step 5 right now. The asymmetry is present. The name isn't here yet. And the reason Step 5 produces something qualitatively different from Step 4, something that can't be retracted, depends entirely on how Saturn operates in Aries and why this particular conjunction does something the same transit in previous years could not. The last 2 Sun-Saturn conjunctions happened in Pisces, February 2024, February 2025, both in the same sign, both operating by the same logic. In Pisces, Saturn is in a sign where it functions close to its native mode, slow accumulation, gradual reinforcement, the patient building of what lasts. A Sun-Saturn conjunction in Pisces doesn't cut, it weighs, it adds density to whatever is already present. If you were carrying an old structure, an old commitment, an old version of a direction, Saturn in Pisces gave it more mass, made it harder to put down, extended the timeline. That's not what happens in Aries. Saturn in Aries is Saturn in its fall. That's a specific technical condition in astrology. It means Saturn is operating outside its native element. In Aries, Saturn can't do what it does naturally. It can't accumulate. It can't reinforce slowly. Aries is the sign of first impulse, of initiation, of identity at its most direct and unmediated. Saturn in that sign doesn't build. It makes singular, immediate contact. And when it makes that contact, it reveals rather than reinforces. What it reveals specifically, which structures can stand in a new cycle, and which ones only existed because the conditions of the old cycle were still present. Tomorrow's conjunction is a synodic reset, the moment when the Sun-Saturn cycle that began at the last conjunction closes and a new one opens. At the exact moment the old cycle ends, Saturn in Aries does something it couldn't do in Pisces. It drops the weight of what the old cycle was carrying, not gradually, not over months, at the conjunction itself. This is what the hook means precisely. Saturn doesn't suggest, It defines. In Pisces, Saturn could soften the contact, could extend the ambiguity a few more months, could give both options a little more time to coexist. You've had 2 years of that. 2 years of Saturn conjunctions that reinforced whatever was already present rather than defining what was real and what wasn't. Tomorrow that changes. Saturn in Aries at the synodic reset has one function: to make contact with what's actually viable in the new cycle and what requires the conditions of the old one to survive. Here's the thing that most readings on this transit don't say clearly. The option that gets released tomorrow, the one that receives a name, isn't necessarily the worse option on paper. It may be the more familiar one, the safer one, the one that asks less of you on the surface. But its existence as a real option depended on conditions that are no longer present: the fog of Saturn-Neptune, the return loop of Mercury retrograde, the equal weight that both paths carried when neither one had visible edges. Remove those conditions, which the sequence from February through yesterday did step by step, and one option is left standing without the scaffolding that made it feel equally possible. Saturn tomorrow doesn't close a door. It names what was already behind it, and that naming lands differently than a decision because it doesn't come from you. It comes from the structure completing, which means what you're left with tomorrow morning isn't the relief of having chosen. It's the quieter, more disorienting recognition of having seen something you already knew. The recognition that lands tomorrow morning is not the same as making a decision. That distinction matters because one of those feels like agency and the other feels like something being taken from you. When you make a decision, you choose, you weigh, you conclude, you act. The outcome belongs to you. If it turns out to be wrong, it was your wrong. If it's right, it was your right. The authorship is yours throughout. What Saturn in Aries produces at the synodic reset is different. You don't choose which option survives. The structure completes, and one of them is still standing. The other one isn't closed by your hand. It's revealed as having required conditions that no longer exist. That's a different experience entirely. And it can feel, in the first hours after it lands, like something was taken rather than something chosen. That feeling is accurate. Something is being taken. Specifically, the version of the future that required the old conditions to remain viable. Here is what that option actually needed in order to stay real. It needed the fog of Saturn-Neptune, the equal dissolution of both paths, to keep it from being seen clearly against the other one. It needed the Mercury retrograde loop to keep resetting every approach back to open question, because a clear approach would have let one path settle. It needed the equal weight of the crossroads to continue, because in genuine asymmetry, this option doesn't hold its ground. Take those conditions away, and they've been taken away one by one across 6 weeks. And what's left of that option is its idea, not the option itself. The habit of treating it as a real possibility. The comfort of its continued existence as a future you could still choose if the other one became too much. That's what Saturn names tomorrow. Not a bad path. A path that was always more comfortable as a held option than it would have been as an actual direction. You've known this. The hook is precise, something in you already decided. The knowing wasn't new information. It was present in February, present in March, present every time you felt the recognition and pulled back from it. What was also present was the legitimate structural support for not letting that knowing be final. Both options had equal fog. Both had equal weight. The conditions genuinely supported the holding. Tomorrow, at 4:54 a.m. Eastern Time, they don't anymore. What that leaves you with is not clarity in the clean sense. The hook names this precisely too. The unexpected thing about this transit isn't the pressure. It's what gets exposed. Exposure is different from resolution. You're not going to wake up tomorrow feeling settled and certain. You're going to wake up or move through the morning with a quiet internal shift that doesn't announce itself loudly. A sense that one of the two futures has less substance to it than it did yesterday. Not dramatically less, just less ground under it than before. That's the recognition. And the reason it lands differently than a decision is that you can argue with a decision. You can revisit it, reopen it, decide differently. What Saturn defines in Aries at the synodic reset doesn't stay open for revision in the same way. Because it isn't a conclusion you reached. It's a structural fact that the sequence produced. The question now is not whether this happens. It's what the day itself looks like when it does, and how to read what you're feeling at each point in it without misinterpreting the harder moments as signals that something went wrong. Tomorrow has two distinct moments. They don't feel the same. And if you only know about the first one, the second can read as a problem it isn't. The first moment, 4:54 a.m. Eastern Time. Sun conjunct Saturn exact. Most people are asleep at 4:54 a.m. The conjunction doesn't wait for you to be conscious of it. By the time you wake up, it will have already occurred. What that means practically is that the morning doesn't begin with a dramatic shift. It begins with something quieter, a quality in the first hour or two that feels different from the past 6 weeks without being obviously different. Not relief, not resolution. Something more like a settling. The specific texture of a question that has stopped being a question, even if you haven't yet named what it became. You may notice it as a change in how the two options feel when you think about them. Not that one feels exciting and the other feels wrong. More that one of them feels like it has less underneath it than it did yesterday. Less ground, less substance to it as an actual future. That's the Saturn contact doing what it does in Aries at the synodic reset, not announcing itself, just removing what it removed. Don't push past it. Don't immediately try to convert the settling into a statement or a plan. The morning is for registering what's there, not for acting on it before the second moment arrives. The second moment, 3:17 p.m. Eastern Time. First quarter moon in Cancer, square Sun Saturn in Aries. This is the part that gets misread. The moon in Cancer activates attachment, the specific pull toward what is familiar, protected, close. Cancer is where you hold what matters most personally. Home, the people you don't want to hurt, the version of your life that felt safe. A square means direct tension. At 3:17 p.m. Eastern Time, the moon in Cancer makes a square to Saturn and the Sun in Aries. And what that produces is not a reversal of the morning settling. It's the emotional weight of it arriving. In practical terms, the afternoon of the 25th may feel harder than the morning. What landed quietly at 4:54 a.m. as a structural fact now meets the part of you that is attached to what that fact costs. You may feel resistance. You may feel something that resembles grief, not for a loss that just happened, but for a version of the future you've been holding and are now, for the first time, genuinely releasing. You may feel an impulse to reopen what the morning closed. That impulse is not a signal that the morning was wrong. The moon in Cancer square Saturn is the emotional completion of what Saturn defined. Clarity without emotional weight is incomplete. The afternoon provides the weight, the place in your body where this lands, the specific people or circumstances it touches, the thing you've been protecting that the Saturn contact now asks you to see clearly. What survives both moments, the quiet morning settling and the heavier afternoon activation, is the complete form of what this day produces. Not a thought, not a preference. A direction with its full cost present, held in the same moment as the recognition that it's the only real one. That's what the sequence from February to today was building toward. Not a decision made in the best moment. A definition arrived at through the full arc of what it took to get here. And by evening, not dramatically, but plainly, you'll know which version of your life has ground under it and which one was an idea you were holding in the place where a real option would have been. 3 orientations for tomorrow. Not instructions, ways of reading the day so you don't misinterpret what's happening at each point in it. The first, in the morning, register the settling without converting it immediately into action. The conjunction occurs at 4:54 a.m. Eastern Time, while you're likely asleep. When you wake up, you're already on the other side of it. What you're looking for in the first hour or two isn't a dramatic clarity. It's the quieter thing, one of the two options feeling like it has less substance to it than it did yesterday. Less ground. If that's present, don't immediately reach for your phone, don't call someone, don't draft a message, just register it. The morning is not the moment for action. It's the moment for noticing that what Saturn defined has already landed, without theater, without announcement, the way structural things tend to arrive. The second, In the afternoon, don't interpret difficulty as reversal. At 3:17 p.m. Eastern Time, the first quarter moon in Cancer squares Sun-Saturn in Aries. What that produces, resistance, a pull toward what's familiar, something that resembles grief, is not a sign the morning was wrong. It's the emotional completion of what the morning defined. You can't have a definition that costs something without the cost arriving in the body at some point. The afternoon is that point. The attachment you feel in those hours, to the option that's losing ground, to the people or circumstances connected to it, to the version of your life that held it as real, is accurate. It's a real cost. Feeling it doesn't reopen what Saturn closed. It completes the picture. If the afternoon feels harder than the morning, that's the day working correctly. The third. By evening, what has survived both moments is the full form of the answer. Not a preference, not a lean. A direction that has been seen clearly in the morning and felt fully in the afternoon. That's a different thing from what you've had these past 6 weeks. It's not more comfortable. It's more real. And what's real doesn't need to be acted on tonight. Tomorrow, Venus reaches Chiron in Aries, and that transit moves into the specific places where this direction costs you personally. That's the next step. Tonight is for letting today be complete without forcing what comes after it to arrive before it's ready. The day has a shape. Morning, structural settling; afternoon, emotional weight; evening, the full form of what was defined, held without urgency. That's enough for one day. Sun-Saturn landed. The fog, the loop, the equal weight, that entire sequence completed. What you're left with is not relief. It's a direction with edges. The version of your life that was never really a choice has a name now. The definition is there. What isn't there yet is what it costs, concretely, in the places that are closest to you. That's a different kind of weight than what this week carried. Tomorrow, Venus reaches Chiron in Aries. What got defined today moves into the territory of what you've protected, avoided, or set aside in the process. That part of this sequence is not abstract. Subscribe and stay close. March 26th is already in motion.